Carmy wakes up in his struggling Chicago sandwich shop after dreaming about a caged bear. He is still shaken by his brother Michael's death, but he tries to handle the chaos in the kitchen. He calls his sister Natalie and argues with vendors about short deliveries, admitting he's still figuring things out. The staff also doesn't respect him at all. Ibrahim refuses to change his methods, Tina mocks his knife skills, and Michael's best friend Richie constantly challenges his authority. Soon after, Carmy hires Sydney as a sous chef. He recognizes her talent, but also her lack of awareness about how messy the restaurant really is. He insists the team should share family meals to build unity. So, even with a broken mixer, he tells Marcus to double the bread production and promises to fix it soon. To bring in more customers, Carmy and Richie attempt to organize a ball breaker arcade, but Richie gets angry that Carmy didn't ask his opinion first. Their argument soon reveals deeper pain as Richie feels as if Carmy is abandoning them after Michael's death and is now ruining the balance at the shop. Still, they prepare for the event, and the kitchen spirals into chaos. Richie is still clinging to the old system, while Carmy pushes for his new rules, sharpens knives, and demands order. Because of this, tension builds, the money is tight, and the beef shipment arrives wrong. When Natalie shows up with Michael's old jacket, she reminds Carmy that no one asked him to fix everything. Later that night, he struggles to keep the place together amid broken equipment and costumed gamers. Outside, Richie fires a warning shot to break up a fight, yelling at the dorks to clean up their mess. But despite the chaos, the night still ends with the crew sharing food and a small moment of gratitude, hinting that their job of rebuilding the restaurant has only just begun. Inside, Carmy demands consistency and respect, calling everyone chef. In a flashback, Carmy recalls being embarrassed as a strict head chef in an upscale New York kitchen calls him untalented. Haunted by that memory, he now mutters hands as chaos erupts around him in Chicago, demanding near-perfect precision from his team. However, Marcus and Tina continuously argue over dough temperature, and whenever Sydney tries to help, Carmy brushes her off. Even though the crew doesn't seem to care, Carmy lectures them about fine dining kitchens similar to high-end restaurants like Noma and the French Laundry, where absolute perfection is the rule. On the other hand, Richie boasts that DeVry taught him how to fix the broken ice cream machine. Later that night, Carmy stays up cleaning every corner of the kitchen before falling asleep while watching old cooking shows, still haunted by nightmares of his harsh former boss. The next day, Sydney suggests they add takeout orders to reduce labor and even tries to show Carmy a binder full of cost-cutting ideas they may use. Though Carmy is impressed, he admits that he can't afford to pay her properly yet. However, their talk is suddenly interrupted by an unexpected health inspection. An inspector named Nancy Chor ends up giving the restaurant a C grade after finding several violations, like cigarettes on the stovetop, holes in the tiles stuffed with napkins, and the lack of hot water. Though Richie tries to fix the issues right away, she still refuses to return for 30 days. Richie admits his business license is suspended, which angers Carmy, so he sends him out for supplies instead. Sydney is tasked to drive him, tolerating his crude jokes until he opens up about Michael's suicide 4 months earlier. Later, their Uncle Jimmy informs Carmy about a $300,000 debt Michael borrowed and never repaid. He also warns Carmy that the shop is a sinking ship, so he demands either a repayment or ownership of the restaurant. While on their drive back, Sydney opens up to Richie, saying she believes Carmy is talented, even mentioning that he was once named one of Food and Wine's best new chefs at just 21. After calling his young daughter, Richie shows a softer side. Later, Carmy calls Natalie to tell her about his sleepless nights, panic attacks, and how he stayed in that toxic New York kitchen before because success somehow numbed the pain. Hearing this, she urges him to take care of himself. In the end, Richie hides a letter from Michael addressed to Carmy. Unaware of this, Carmy officially names Sydney as a sous chef and is now more determined to rebuild both the restaurant and himself from the ground up. Soon after, a woman's voice narrates about her life while living with an addict and learning that real change begins by keeping your side of the street clean. Carmy walks along the beach, and coincidentally, her words somehow echo his struggle to handle the mess left by his late brother Michael. Back in the kitchen, Richie is shouting that orders are behind, while Sydney blames him and chaos erupts because of this. Trying to seek control, Carmy reads them some of the Al-Anon pamphlets that talk about forgiveness and humility. The next morning, Carmy arrives to notice Marcus's food photos on the wall and recalls the precision and discipline of his fine dining days. This makes Carmy realize the kitchen can't keep running in constant chaos. So he proposes that they use a more traditional brigade system to restore order. He argues that structure will help them work and breathe better. But Sydney disagrees with him, saying that it could only create hierarchy and resentment, but she still reluctantly agrees to help. With this, Carmy assigns them a designated station and titles. Richie jokes about the idea of uniforms. Ibra proudly takes his role as chef de partie, and Tina stays resistant. But then, someone accidentally calls out Michael's name, which only freezes Carmy and once again reminds him of his loss. Meanwhile, Sydney is the one to run pre-shift checks and walkthroughs, but her control easily slips when faced with pressure. Slowly, these small mistakes pile up as Tina burns the stock. Sydney cuts her finger, the onions go missing, and veal spills on the floor. By the time Carmy returns, he and Sydney immediately argue about who's to blame until they they finally admit that the system failed because they stopped listening to each other at some point. On the other hand, Carmy confides that he attended an Al-Anon meeting to cope with Michael's addiction. As he looks out at the water, he is still haunted but is now more focused, so he and Sydney share a quiet moment of understanding. The next morning, Richie struggles to set up a huge inflatable hot dog to promote the restaurant, while Marcus visits a donut shop to look for inspiration. Carmy reminds him that they need to cater to Jimmy's son's birthday to stay afloat and still owe Uncle Jimmy money. At the party, tension begins to build as Carmy receives several uncomfortable condolences about Michael's death, and Richie argues with Jimmy, who keeps calling him Rick. Back at the shop, Sydney supports Marcus's pastry experiments, but Tina remains defiant and resistant to her authority. During the catering event, Richie's anxiety suddenly spikes, which leads him to secretly slip an Xanax into Carmy's drink. The party soon spirals into chaos when the spiked ecto-cooler causes several kids to fall asleep. Though furious at first, Uncle Jimmy eventually laughs it off. Amid the disorder, Marcus gains confidence in his baking skills, and Sydney manages to quietly fix Tina's ruined potatoes, earning her respect. Later, as Carmy and Jimmy share an honest talk about Michael, including his recklessness, debt, and the futility of trying to fix everything, they realize that despite their differences, Jimmy admits he still misses Michael and warns Carmy not to let work consume him. At the end of the night, Tina thanks Sydney for her help, Jimmy forgives part of the restaurant's debt, and Carmy drives Pete, Natalie's husband, home, reflecting on how fragile their family has become. Back at the beef, Marcus proudly shares a piece of cake with everyone. It is a small but hopeful sign that despite experiencing such exhaustion and grief, their fractured team is slowly starting to come together again. The next day, Sydney wakes up to the sound of a train rattling past her small apartment. She spends the morning reflecting on her failed catering company and the loan that never came through. There are also empty boxes labeled Sheridan Road Catering sitting in the corners, which is a quiet reminder of her lost dreams. After taking her medication, she heads out for the beef, but she accidentally wakes her father on the way. When Sydney arrives at work, Carmy is already reviewing their expenses. They realize that the restaurant's dinner service is losing money because their prices are too low to even cover the labor costs. Hoping to turn things around, they decide to create a new dinner menu. Soon, Marcus enters, eager to share a book he's been reading, but chaos erupts when the toilet suddenly floods. Carmy attempts to fix it, but it only makes things even worse, forcing him to call a man named Fack for repairs. Because of this, Sydney suggests closing for the day, but Carmy insists on staying open. As the plumbing disaster unfolds, the team continues to work on new dishes in the kitchen. Richie pretends to take charge, but mostly irritates Fack, who shows up with his usual clumsy energy. While Carmy guides Tina and Ibrahim through new recipes, Marcus focuses on desserts. The crew adapts by setting up makeshift cooking stations outside. However, power outages and other small mistakes still make the day another chaotic struggle. Later, Carmy and Sydney share a quiet talk about their ambitions and failures. He admits that mistakes are part of the process, while she opens up about how her catering business had collapsed after expanding too fast. As the exhausting day ends, Sydney stays awake, jotting down the new recipe ideas she comes up with in her notebook. Soon after, Mikey tells a story about the Ceres Bar, which is a famous Chicago spot where traders tend to go to drink away their losses. Years later, Richie retells the same story on a failed date, with his voice fading as his loneliness starts longing for the past becomes clear. Back at the beef, Sydney experiments with the leftover ingredients in order to create a new dish, but she soon clashes with Carmy, who prefers to focus on stability. He admits he looked into her background and knows she's talented, but she is also impatient. As they work side by side, the struggle between creativity and control grows, reflecting their shared desire to rebuild while keeping the restaurant afloat. Natalie also arrives at the restaurant, both exhausted and frustrated, as she reveals that Michael's unpaid taxes have left her in serious trouble. She discovered that she's still listed as a co-owner, which means that the IRS could take her house. Together, she and Carmy dig through piles of paperwork. Meanwhile, Marcus spends his nights sleeping at the beef, pouring his energy into perfecting his donuts, and his obsession is replacing any sense of rest he may have. Richie reflects on how fragile their lives have become and how much their neighborhood is changing. Suddenly, gunfire shatters the restaurant's front window, and fear and tension spread through the team. With this, Natalie lashes out, blaming the restaurant for consuming them all. Her argument with Carmy reopens old wounds, which forces them to confront how deeply their family's pain still runs. As Sydney tries to step in to stop a fight between two men outside the restaurant, her composure shows how much she has grown under pressure. Meanwhile, Richie lashes out, feeling that the place has lost its soul and that he no longer belongs in the new system they created. He threatens to quit, but despite the turmoil outside, the rest of the team keeps working steadily inside. As Sufjan Stevens' song Chicago plays into the beef, the staff prepares for the upcoming rush while Carmy walks through the city streets. Ibrahim reads aloud a glowing review that calls the beef elevated, which significantly fills the room with pride and pressure. The kitchen hums with nervous energy as Sydney quietly quietly helps Tina with prep work. The team isn't ready for this new attention, and though the review praises Sydney's risotto, this leaves her uneasy about the expectations that have just risen. As the balance inside the restaurant begins to break down, the number of orders increases, and tension builds up. Sydney makes a mistake with the pre-orders, and the kitchen becomes easily overloaded with hundreds of orders that they are still unable to fulfill, causing more chaos. In the middle of everything, Carmy's voice breaks through, demanding order. But instead of lending a hand, Marcus still remains fixated on his donuts, Fack struggles with doing repairs, and Richie loses his temper when Sydney grows increasingly irritated. Soon, plates shatter, voices collide, and the heat of the kitchen mirrors the team's complete breakdown. In the chaos, Sydney and Richie's argument turns violent, and ultimately ends with an accidental stabbing that prompts the room to be silent. Overwhelmed by Carmy's constant harshness and exhaustion, Sydney finally walks out and Marcus soon follows with his dream shattered. Carmy is now left alone in the wreckage, realizing too late all the talent he's driven away. Before leaving, he tastes the donut Marcus perfected while standing in the ruin of the beef. After a few days, Carmy imagines himself hosting a cooking show. As he demonstrates how to make braciola, his surroundings quietly fall apart in a dreamlike haze. He soon recalls memories of Michael, including his addiction, suicide, and the lingering pain of being left behind. When Carmy wakes up, the illusion is gone, but the grief feels the same. To seek relief, Carmy attends an Al-Anon meeting and opens up about his pain. He speaks about cooking with Michael, his years wasted chasing perfection in world-class kitchens, and his desperate need for his brother's approval. While fixing the restaurant, he realizes that it's also his way of trying to fix himself, and this confession becomes an act of forgiveness for himself. As life continues to go on at the beach, Sydney and Marcus reconnect, and they share food, regrets, and even a fragile sense of renewed purpose. Meanwhile, Tina quietly holds the team together. After his angry breakdown, Richie recognizes how close he came to losing everything. So, out of the chaos, each of the staff eventually begins to heal. Soon after, Carmy finds Michael's hidden letter, which contains a recipe for their family's spaghetti, paired with a note. When he opens a can of tomatoes, he uncovers stacks of hidden cash inside it, and that's when he finally understands Michael's final act of care and belief in him. Afterwards, the message, "The beef is closed," appears as the family gathers for their family dinner. In the window, the words, "The bear is coming," signal the promise of transformation. Afterwards, Marcus visits his sick mother, while Carmy's crew begins transforming the beef into the bear, funding their new branding with the cash Michael hid in the tomato cans. Richie is still struggling to find direction as he grows restless and resentful, while Sydney invites Natalie to join the beef as their new project manager, hoping she will be able to help in keeping the dream alive. During renovations, an ear-splitting alarm suddenly blares. Soon after, Carmy pitches the concept of the bear to his unle Jimmy and takes a risk. If he fails to repay the $800,000 loan he made within 18 months, then he will lose the building. But the team is determined, so they commit to opening the bear in just 3 months. That same evening, while surrounded by blueprints and broken walls, the team silently vows to rebuild both the restaurant and themselves. As the renovations begin, the restaurant descends into pure chaos, with arguments flaring, dust clouds rising, and ceilings crumbling. Meanwhile, Natalie officially joins the team full-time, juggling both the permit problems and plumbing leaks. To improve their craft, Ibrahim and Tina spend time attending culinary school, while Sydney and Carmy stay up all night to craft a new menu. When Richie and Fack uncover mold behind the old lockers, they realize that there are structural troubles ahead. Later, Sydney reflects on her past failures and the pressure of starting over, while Natalie can only quietly wonder whether they're truly building something new or merely trying to preserve its crumbs. The next day, Carmy unexpectedly happens to come across Claire, his childhood friend. As the long day ends, the team gathers beneath their restaurant's flickering lights, surrounded by dust and half-built walls. In that quiet moment, they realize that every mistake, every setback, and every wall they tear down only brings them one step closer to their goal of creating something new. Time flies fast, and soon, with only 11 weeks remaining, the pressure increasingly mounts. Carmy begins therapy, confronting his inability to stay present because of the ghosts of his past. Meanwhile, Sydney's research exposes the brutal truth of the restaurant's survival, so her failed experiments only leave her anxious and restless. On the other hand, after reconnecting with Claire, Carmy cancels their planned food tour, which deepens Sydney's doubts about his focus. Feeling alone, she searches for Chicago's dining scene for inspiration. She delves into tasting, watching, and learning from others. Meanwhile, Ibrahim leaves culinary school, and Richie continues to wrestle with his lingering dissatisfaction. As dusk falls, Sydney returns to the half-finished restaurant to test a new dish, but it collapses again, mirroring her exhaustion and uncertainty. Yet despite it all, her determination remains, positive that the bear will rise, even if she must lift it all alone. In the midst of the construction construction's noise, Natalie's secret pregnancy gets revealed, and as confessions spill out, the walls also begin to crumble. Meanwhile, Marcus departs for Copenhagen to train under Luca, who is a disciplined pastry chef who teaches him both patience and precision. Marcus lives his life on a boat and works in quiet kitchens. Each of his desserts becomes a reflection of his loss and renewal. From afar, he gains perspective on the bear's ongoing struggles, including the permit rejections and failed fire safety tests. Through Luca, Marcus learns that success depends more on kindness and consistency than on competition. So when he finally perfects his own dessert, he realizes that his growth extends far beyond the kitchen. Soon, there are only 6 weeks remaining, and exhaustion can be seen on every face. Despite Tina's steady help with testing Sydney's new recipes, each attempt still collapses in frustration. On the other hand, Carmy grows obsessed with perfecting the kitchen's design, while Richie and Fack face another wave of electrical problems that may threaten their progress. When Uncle Jimmy visits to inspect their work, he delivers a sobering warning, reminding them that time is running out and failure is closer than they think. Soon after, Tina returns from culinary school with her renewed skill and confidence. However, Carmy's focus drifts to Claire, reigniting an old connection that gives him happiness yet distracts him from the bear. Despite these mounting setbacks, including internal conflict, stolen electricity, and a failing HVAC, the team still chose to push forward. As night falls, Carmy finally lets his guard down and kisses Claire, both sharing a fleeting calm amid the chaos while the bear remains half-built. In a flashback set 5 years before the bear is even conceptualized, the Berzatto family's Christmas dinner suddenly crumbles into complete chaos. When Carmy returned from Copenhagen, the house was filled with tension, clattering dishes, and buried affection. Donna, who is the volatile matriarch, sweated through the feast of the 7 fishes, rejecting every offer of help while desperately demanding attention. Her frantic energy spread through the household, and soon, Richie's immaturity flared. Michael simmered with resentment. Carmy anxiously tried to hold everything together, and Natalie worried in silence. Around them, Uncle Lee, Cousin Michelle, and her partner Stephen, Tiffany, who is pregnant and exhausted, the Fack brothers, and other guests crowded a home that seems ready to explode. As the night wore on, Donna's long-simmering resentment finally exploded family. Her need for perfection collapsed because of unmet expectations. Her self-pity is only masking a deep and aching loneliness. That night, forks were thrown, secrets were revealed, and their love had turned into fury as old arguments resurfaced to bring out brutal clarity. In a drunken outburst, Michael's rage turned toward Uncle Lee, while Donna, who was still spiraling into despair, cried, saying no one cared for her. But the breaking point came when she suddenly drove her car straight through the front door because of humiliation. So that same evening, amid all the shattered glass and flashing red lights, the family stood frozen, realizing their love had been fractured beyond repair. In the present, Richie is sent to one of America's finest restaurants, which perfectly characterizes the definition of precision and order. At first, he despises it because the spotless kitchens, the hushed discipline, and the constant reminder that every second counts are new to him. When he is assigned to polish the forks, he sulks in resentment, convinced that Carmy is exiling him as a joke. However, as he watches the staff move with grace and purpose, he begins to see that everything they do seems to carry weight. Underneath their repetitive routine lies respect, pride, and a kind of peace he never knew he was missing. Richie's resentment is soon challenged when he engages in a conversation with his calmest and pragmatic coworker, Garrett. He explains that service is not a form of punishment, but an act of kindness. This idea unsettles Richie at first, but everything changes when he witnesses a manager secretly paying for a couple's meal, and that couple had waited years for a table. The gesture moves him deeply and awakens something inside him. For the first time in many years, he finally feels genuine pride in fulfilling a guest's request. As time passes, Richie slowly finds rhythm in humility. When Chef Terry finally speaks to him, he realizes that she embodies everything Carmy once admired. By the end of the week, Richie is completely transformed. He is now dressed in a sharp suit, his hands steady, and his heart clear. As he returns to the bear, he is no longer a burden, but someone who believes in the power of caring for other people. Soon, only 2 weeks are left before their opening, but the bear is still on the edge of collapse. Inside, gas leaks continue to persist, the fire suppression system keeps failing, and every delay threatens to undo months of work. Yet despite all these, small reconciliations begin to take root. Marcus returns from Copenhagen with beautifully crafted desserts, while Richie is now a composed and assured individual. He apologizes to Natalie and steps up as a leader, and Ibrahim comes back to make amends with Tina after walking out. Sydney, meanwhile, fully embraces Coach K's philosophy as she learns to listen and trust her team. However, Carmy grows increasingly distracted by Claire, so he makes her an inspiration for the restaurant's design. Sydney eventually confronts him about this, frustrated that his focus is slipping just when they need him most. When the inspector arrives for the final testing, the tension also reaches its peak. The gas hisses and the balloon inflates. Fack and Neil scramble to fix the system with their hands trembling, and the room falls silent. 10 seconds of their time feels like an eternity until the inspector finally announces they've passed the test. With this, the team erupts in both joy and disbelief, and they all laugh and cheers. At long last, the bear is finally turned into a reality. Yet Carmy is still torn between his love and his obsession with perfection. In the middle of the celebration, he steps away to call Claire, signaling that he is already slipping back into isolation, even as everyone else exhales in their victory. Soon, their soft opening arrives, and everyone is both excited and nervous. Carmy wakes up beside Claire, and his mind is already spinning with details. Across town, Sydney prepares herself for the long-awaited event that could determine her future. Meanwhile, Natalie quietly admits to inviting Donna, which sends Carmy a chill of old dread. As permits, training, and last-minute repairs pile up, even the smallest flaws begin to make Carmy nervous. Yet, amid the chaos, they still see a light of hope. Marcus names a dessert in Michael's honor. Richie ensures every table is booked, and Sydney makes an omelet for Natalie, which is her simple gesture of taking care of her before things get busy in the kitchen. When Uncle Jimmy arrives with the business license in hand, he reminds Carmy that greatness will always come with a sacrifice, and in his case, whether he can balance love and work remains to be uncertain. As the staff gathers to witness the bear's opening, the team shares their reflections about trust, communication, and patience. Sydney and Carmy exchange a look of mutual respect, and when he hands her a new uniform, it feels like a benediction. The doors to the bear swing open, light floods the room, and the screen fades to black. The opening night of the bear is ecstatic, and what they originally meant to be only a dress rehearsal quickly turns into a trial by fire. Natalie and Richie are the ones taking charge of the front, while Sydney runs the expo with Carmy supporting right behind her. The dining room soon buzzes with guests, and orders start piling up. In the middle of all this, Josh, their new hire, suddenly vanishes, and the dishes tend to go cold before they can even reach the tables. To make things worse, Carmy accidentally traps himself inside the walk-in refrigerator, so Sydney struggles to keep the kitchen steady all by herself, while Marcus begins to feel overwhelmed by the pressure, and Natalie tries her best to fight off a plumbing disaster. Surprisingly, Richie is the one who steps up. With his calm composure, he restores order with authority until, at last, the service team finds their rhythm again. Outside, Donna is smoking in the dark, still frozen by the guilt of ruining her children's achievement. Because of this, she refuses to step inside, convinced she doesn't deserve to witness what they've built. Inside, Sydney suddenly vomits because of the stress, but she manages to steady herself, realizing she has finally earned her place. While Carmy, who is still trapped in the walk-in, begins spiraling into self-loathing, unaware that Claire is hearing all of his regrets through the door. As night grows deeper, their triumph still feels empty. Although the restaurant thrives, Carmy remains bothered, still uncertain if peace will ever find him. Soon, a dreamlike montage of Carmy's memories suddenly resurfaces, where his brutal years under the merciless chefs come fleeting, even his moments with family, and the ache of Michael's death. Each memory shows how cruelty has shaped him to become the perfectionist that he is now. In the present, Carmy tries to impose order in the middle of the chaos. He obsessively cleans the bear, labels every shelf, and fills his notebook with sharp rules. Meanwhile, Marcus is grieving the loss of his mother alone, but he soon finds comfort in Sydney's voicemail, which urges him to reconnect with Richie. As the day fades, Carmy serves Sydney a meal in a sleek New York kitchen, and her calm curiosity reflects the part of himself he's still chasing. The next day at the Bear, Carmy unveils his list of non-negotiables, which raises the tension. His relentless drive tends to come into conflict with Sydney's usual morning routine, which is spent sharing breakfast with her father. While Sydney adjusts her menu, Natalie worries about raising a child in the middle of all the chaos that is surrounding the restaurant. As the team grows uneasy under Carmy's ever-changing standards, Richie mocks his list, which only reignites their long-standing feud. Carmy attempts to make an apology, but it ends up falling flat, exposing that he has become disconnected from those around him. Amid the chaos, Marcus returns. Though he is carrying the weight of his mother's death, he keeps moving forward. So, as the night ends, he asks Carmy how to make the bear into something meaningful. As workdays begin with Marcus's heartfelt eulogy for his mother, a somber tone lingers through the kitchen. The exhaustion deepens, and Richie's impatience collides with Carmy's relentless perfectionism, which which only creates more chaos. Natalie warns them that the restaurant is bleeding money, while Sydney struggles to hold the team together. Under this, Ibrahim's station collapses, and their communication as a team breaks down entirely. By closing time, Sydney's faith in the bear's dream begins to fade, and Carmy, who is also consumed by stress, starts to lose sight of what he's trying to build. The next day, a fleeting memory of Claire begins to fade, which leaves Carmy in isolation. At the same time, Sydney is struggling with doubts about their partnerships. Marcus is still grieving. Natalie is facing her growing anxiety, and Richie is confronting his ex's remarriage. However, the tension reaches its peak when Sydney and Carmy clash over the changes in the menu, their frustrations spilling through the kitchen as the facts' relentless critiques increase Carmy's stress. Just then, another breaking news hit, as they soon found out that the Tribune's critic had already eaten at the bear, adding pressure to the team. As Natalie's due date approaches, she prays alone in a dim church, still haunted by the fears that she might be inheriting her family's instability, and suffers sleepless nights because of this. On the other hand, Sydney is helping Marcus sort through his late mother's belongings, and their shared grief somehow softens the tension between them. Meanwhile, Richie learns that the Ever, a high-end restaurant in Chicago, is now shutting down, signaling the end of an era. While Carmy is fixated on refining dishes at the bear, he is still consumed in his pursuit of perfection. Later, when Natalie offers Marcus comfort, she shows him a violet-themed dessert sketch, a small act of warmth in the middle of strain. Work soon descends into chaotic family antics when the Fack brothers hire their fearsome brother Sammy to help with the restaurant's renovations. As Carmy's fixation deepens, Natalie's exhaustion also worsens, and Uncle Jimmy hires a cost analyst who suggests they fire Marcus, which is something Natalie strongly opposes. Then, a photo shoot demands a duck dish no one remembers creating, so the team scrambles until Carmy eventually finds a box labeled DD, but it's filled with photos of his mother, which only reminds him of a past he can never seem to escape. In a flashback, Tina's story unfolds in 2018. After losing her office job, she faced constant rejections, so her optimism eroded with each failed attempt. Until one cold afternoon, when she stepped into the original beef to seek warmth and solace, she broke down in tears at a table. Michael caught sight of her at that moment, and during their brief conversation, they vented the same feelings of exhaustion and hope. There, promising that the chaos would be worth it, he offered her a job in the kitchen. Tina smiles as a new chapter begins that evening when she gets and puts on her old original beef shirt. In the present, Carmy's loneliness is interrupted by flashbacks of his moments shared with Claire. Meanwhile, Sydney, who is still living alone and restless, is tempted to leave the bear after a chef from the Ever offers her a partnership. Elsewhere, in a therapy group session about forgiveness, Carmy reflects on how his obsession with perfectionism affected everyone he loves. At work, Marcus discovers a photograph in Carmy's notebook featuring a world-famous chef, sparking a conversation about legacy, purpose, and what remains when perfection fades. Ibrahim becomes the one to restore order to the kitchen. With the help of Michael's old friends, they bring a sense of calm to the storm. Natalie and Richie reflect on the family's chaos and the uncertain changes ahead, while Carmy's relentless perfectionism continues to bother Sydney, prompting Natalie to encourage her to consider the partnership offer. When Richie fails to motivate the team, Sydney steps up to lead instead, but Carmy becomes lost in his revisions once again and shuts her out. In the end, Natalie collapses in the parking lot as her labor begins. As her contractions intensify, Natalie gets trapped in traffic, desperate and alone. With this, she decides to call her mother, Donna, who immediately rushes in to help with mixed emotions, especially because no one from the bear seems to be answering. When they arrive at the hospital, the mother and daughter clash over pain relief. While Donna insists on an epidural, Natalie refuses to do so. In between the contractions, they begin to reminisce about their old memories, including Carmy's long, difficult birth, Donna's chaotic labor with Michael, and lastly, the complicated love that always seems to bind and break their family in equal measure. Natalie confesses that as a child, she once made herself sick just to make her mother feel better, but her fear of repeating Donna's mistakes only breaks through. To comfort her, Donna assures her that she will be a wonderful mother. Then, Donna recalls a strange dream she had before Natalie's birth. She dreamed of a massive fish tank that seemed ready to burst anytime. Soon, Pete arrives, and he thanks Donna before slipping out after helping Natalie. In the waiting room, the Fack brothers greet Donna with laughter and warmth, reminding her that she's now a grandmother. Back in the bear, Marcus is watching illusion videos while Carmy is still working on a perfect kitchen order. Meanwhile, Sydney is practicing how to tell him about her job offer, but she ends up losing her nerve each time. After that, a series of grueling services follows, which blur Carmy's imagined headlines. To make things worse, Richie and Gary forget a guest's birthday. Later, Carmy invites Sydney to Chef Terry's closing dinner, where he confesses that he doesn't want everything to feel so hard. That evening, Sydney spent her time reading about articles that credit only Carmy for the bear's success. Meanwhile, Uncle Jimmy, who is secretly facing financial troubles, warns Carmy that he will end the funding if the Tribune review fails. To prevent this, Marcus helps Tina perfect her dish, and Richie reconnects with Tiffany. Meanwhile, Sydney discovers that her new job offer includes better terms than Carmy's contract, contract. She then brings food to Natalie, who is now at home with her newborn. At the same time, the Fact brothers attempt to reach out to Claire on Carmy's behalf, but they still end up in chaos. As the night deepens, Carmy leaves his prayer card behind, suits up for dinner, and steps out. In a flashback of Carmy's early years, it is revealed that she spent time learning to cook from Chef Thomas Keller, one of the greatest chefs in the world. In the present, he attends the Evers farewell dinner with a group of other renowned chefs and comes face to face with David, who is his former tormentor. Meanwhile, Sydney and Luca discuss the sense of belongingness and purpose as Shapiro, a successful restaurateur and investor, pressures her to accept his partnership offer. When Carmy confronts David and accuses him of being the source of his anxiety, David coldly replies that it's the cost of greatness. Later, Terry tells Carmy that it is uncertainty that makes him unbeatable. After the dinner, Sydney hosts a small party, but she ends up panicking alone outside. On the street, Carmy reads the Tribune's review, which holds a mix of praise and criticism, but before he can react, the words begin to blur together and everything goes black. In a flashback, Mikey and Carmy are cooking together while envisioning the restaurant they want to build. In the present, Carmy wakes up to the harsh review that calls the bear missing the mark. With this, he apologizes to Sydney and sets a new goal to make a change. He aims to earn a Michelin star, but pressure mounts when Uncle Jimmy installs a countdown clock showing 60 days before funding runs out. With this, Richie recruits Jessica, Garrett, and Renee from the Ever to help them rebuild the kitchen. Yet when their service begins, chaos still returns, revealing that Carmy's perfectionist dream is still fragile. Soon, Carmy discovers that Abraham has a secret side project, and Sydney cleans Marcus's station. Now that they only have 900 hours left, new problems arise. Tina battles time limits, and farmers cut back on produce deliveries. Facing all these, Sydney briefly considers joining Shapiro's restaurant, but in the end, she chooses to stay, at least for now. As Richie offers a silent prayer, he asks God to keep the bear alive. Meanwhile, Carmy opens up and embraces Sydney's much simpler approach to food. For a moment, the restaurant finds a new source of hope, but underneath it all, there's still a mounting pressure felt by everyone. After perfecting her scallop dish, Sydney finally receives Carmy's approval, signaling a new trust between them. Meanwhile, Richie learns that his ex-wife is remarrying, so Marcus advises Carmy to stay calm for now. During service, Richie creates a touching moment for a VIP family whose daughter wishes to see snow, which fills the room with warmth. Later that night, Carmy visits Claire to apologize for how things ended between them, and they part on peaceful terms. Each offers a quiet closure before Carmy turns his focus back to the bear. The next day, Sydney visits Shapiro's new restaurant and is instantly struck by how refined and precise it is. She also bonds with her cousin Chantel's daughter, TJ, through cooking. He guides her in small choices that make Sydney reflect on her own dilemma between joining Shapiro and staying at the bear. Soon, Carmy's texts frantically light up her phone, and TJ tells her simply to choose what makes her happy. So, Sydney makes up her mind and finally calls Shapiro to discuss the paperwork. At an Al-Anon meeting, Carmy reflects on addiction and control. He then visits a Frank Lloyd Wright house, which symbolizes the balance and structure he lacks. As dawn breaks, the team begins another demanding day at the bear. Tina encourages Carmy to value consistency over perfection, while Marcus finds closure by selling his mother's home and welcoming Chef Luca, who returns to assist at the restaurant. Marcus and Sydney also reconnect warmly. Soon after, Carmy apologizes to Sydney for being too self-absorbed and starts developing a fixed menu, hoping to restore stability. But just as their partnership begins to unfold, Sydney learns that her father has suffered a heart attack and quickly rushes to the hospital, leaving Carmy alone with his thoughts and anxiety. On the other hand, Natalie argues with Francie, her close friend and event planner, over a wedding invitation. As Sydney struggles with guilt about her father's health, Richie is fixated on Tiffany's fiancé, still unable to move on. With this, Claire reassures Sydney, urging her to be compassionate with herself. In the kitchen, Tina experiments with her pasta, which prompts Gary to suggest hiring more staff for efficiency. When Natalie confronts Carmy about constantly running from his emotions, he finally relents, softening as he cradles Natalie's baby, Sophie. Yet beneath that, unease still brews as a returning guest arrives, a food critic who could change everything. On the day of Tiffany's wedding, Richie comforts her daughter Eva, which unites everyone in a warm moment. Carmy also reconnects with his Uncle Lee and learns that Michael was proud of him. Meanwhile, Donna bonds with Sydney, sensing her closeness to Carmy. Amid all the laughter and forgiveness, Carmy and Claire share a quiet dance. Soon, the bear's countdown nears 0, and the team faces reckoning. With fear of what's coming, Carmy decides to finalize the set menu. Sydney also returns to work after her father's recovery, reaffirming her loyalty to the restaurant. For the first time after a long time, the team moves in perfect sync amid the chaos. When the final ticket is served, Carmy gazes at it with an exhausted but calm look, realizing the bear finally becomes the restaurant he dreamed of. Afterwards, Donna tearfully reveals to Carmy that she's been sober for nearly a year and breaks down over her past mistakes. To comfort her, he prepares a simple simple chicken dinner. Meanwhile, Uncle Jimmy and Sydney discuss the bear's future, while Ibrahim considers franchising a sandwich shop, while Tina masters making pasta in under 3 minutes. At the restaurant, Natalie learns that Marcus has been named one of Food & Wine's best new chefs. Later, Pete tells Sydney that Carmy's name is missing from the new ownership papers, and only hers and Natalie's remain. Because of this, Sydney asks Carmy whether he plans to leave once the debts are cleared, and their argument erupts into raw confessions of fear, resentment, and love for the kitchen. Richie also joins in, each facing the weight of their pride and grief. Sydney agrees to stay on the condition that Richie becomes a partner, and Carmy accepts. As the countdown reaches 0, Natalie embraces Carmy in farewell, while the bear, rebuilt through loss, forgiveness, and fragile hope, stands uncertain but alive.